You are nothing but a reckless, arrogant little girl who thinks she's above this institution. Dr. Richard Owens snatched the termination letter off his desk and shoved it hard into Amelia's chest, so hard she stumbled backward into the wall. She was still wearing her surgical gloves. Still had blood on her scrubs, the blood of a man whose heart she had just restarted with her bare hands in a hospital hallway. Owens grabbed her badge, ripped it off her coat himself, and threw it at her feet. "Get out. Security will make sure you leave." 11 minutes later, a Navy helicopter landed on the roof, and Richard Owens would never recover from what happened next. Subscribe, drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had started the way most Mondays did at Memorial Hospital, with the smell of cold coffee, the sound of rubber-soled shoes squeaking on linoleum, and the low hum of a building that never truly slept. But for Dr. Amelia Grant, Monday mornings had always carried a specific kind of weight. Not dread exactly, more like awareness, a sharpening of the senses. The way a soldier might feel standing at the edge of a known danger zone, calm on the surface, every nerve underneath tuned to a frequency that most people couldn't hear. She had been on call since Friday, 72 hours, and she was still standing, still moving, still thinking clearly, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. Amelia was 34 years old, but she carried herself like someone who had lived 3 lives already. The first life had been in the Army 4 years as a combat medic deployed to Afghanistan, where she had learned that medicine wasn't always clean or quiet or done in a room with proper lighting. The second life had been medical school, which she had attacked with the same ferocity she'd brought to the battlefield. And the third life was this Memorial Hospital in San Diego, where she had spent the last 2 years trying to be the kind of doctor that people like her younger self had desperately needed. She was good. She knew she was good. Not in an arrogant way. Arrogance got people killed, and she had seen that firsthand, but in the grounded, unshakable way of someone who had passed every test that mattered. Not the written kind, the kind where failure meant a body bag. It was 7:42 in the morning when the ambulance came in. Amelia was halfway through a chart review at the nurse's station when she heard the bay doors slam open and the paramedics shouting over each other. She was moving before she consciously decided to move. That was a reflex that never went away. The muscle memory of someone who had sprinted toward explosions when every instinct in a normal human being would have said, run the other way. Male 51 construction worker fell from a scaffold approximately 30 feet. The lead paramedic was saying, pushing the gurney hard. BP is crashing, 60/40 and dropping. Breath sounds absent on the left. We think tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the chest cavity, collapsing the lung, compressing the heart, cutting off blood flow. It was the kind of thing that killed people not in hours, not in minutes, but in seconds. And the treatment, the only treatment that worked in time, was a needle. A large bore needle driven directly into the chest, right there wherever you happened to be standing. "Which trauma room?" Amelia asked, already pulling on gloves. "1 is occupied, 2 is being cleaned. We've got a code in 3. "Then we stop right here," Amelia said. The paramedic blinked. "Dr. Grant, we can't." "We stop right here," she said again, and her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something in it that made people stop arguing. His pressure is 60/40, and the trachea is deviated. He has maybe 90 seconds before his heart arrests. Give me a 14-gauge needle. There was a half-second pause, the kind of pause that happens when the world holds its breath, and then the paramedic was reaching into the supply bag, and Amelia was leaning over the man on the gurney, her fingers finding the landmarks on his chest, with the same precision that a pianist finds the keys in the dark. She drove the needle in. The hiss of released air was immediate, almost theatrical in its relief, like a tire deflating. The man on the gurney gasped a real breath, the first real breath he'd taken in minutes, and his color began to change from the gray-blue of impending death back towards something that resembled the living. "Get me a BP," Amelia said. 90/60 and climbing, the nurse beside her said. "Oh my God." "Don't oh my God me, get him to a room and get thoracic surgery on the phone." Amelia straightened up, stripped off the gloves, and reached for the chart. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was when she felt the presence behind her. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. She had developed over years of working in this building a very particular awareness of certain people the way you develop awareness of a weather system that tends to bring storms. Dr. Grant, the voice was flat, controlled, and cold in the very specific way of someone who has spent years perfecting the art of sounding reasonable while being anything but. She turned. Dr. Richard Owens stood at the edge of the hallway, and his face was doing the thing it always did. When he was furious, it went very, very still. He was 61, silver-haired, and built like a man who had been important his entire life and expected the world to reflect that importance back at him at all times. He held a clipboard against his chest like a shield. "Dr. Owens," she said, "I need to follow this patient into... You performed an unauthorized procedure in an unsecured location without proper surgical consult," he said. Amelia paused. She looked at him. "I saved his life." "You violated protocol." "He had a tension pneumothorax, Dr. Owens. He would have been dead in 60 seconds. "That is not the point." "With respect," she said, and she kept her voice level because she had learned painfully that losing her temper in this building only ever made things worse. "I think that is exactly the point. The point of medicine, the point of a hospital. The point, he said, cutting her off, is that we have procedures for a reason. Liability, documentation, chain of command. This institution cannot function if every attending physician decides to improvise life-altering interventions in the middle of a public hallway." "He was dying," she said again, "right there in front of me. And there are protocols for that." She stared at him. Something in her chest went very quiet. The protocols would have taken 8 minutes minimum. He had 90 seconds. "Then that is a deficiency in our protocols that will be addressed through the appropriate channels." He held out the clipboard. She could see a form on it, a pink form. "I need you to come to my office. Now that patient needs..." "Now, Dr. Grant." The man on the gurney was being wheeled away by the nurses. She could hear his breathing, real breathing, steady breathing, the breathing of a man who was going to live to see his family tonight because of what she had just done. And Dr. Richard Owens was holding a pink form and pointing at his office. She followed him. The walk to the administrative wing of Memorial Hospital was not long in terms of distance. It was about 200 feet, a left turn past the pharmacy, through the double doors, and down a corridor lined with framed photographs of hospital directors and benefactors and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But it felt long. It always felt long. Walking toward accountability for doing the right thing had a particular kind of heaviness to it, the heaviness of a system pressing down on you from above, reminding you of your place. His office smelled like mahogany and ambition. He went behind his desk. She stood in front of it. She noticed, as she had noticed before, that he never offered her a chair. "This is the third incident in 6 months," he said, sitting down, opening a folder. "January, you administered a clotting agent to a trauma patient before the attending could be reached. March, you intubated a child in the waiting room. And now this." "All 3 of those patients lived," she said. "That is not the criteria by which I evaluate physician conduct in this hospital." "Then what is..." He looked up from the folder. "Compliance, Dr. Grant. Institutional compliance. Respect for authority. Proper escalation of care." He paused. "You are a talented physician. No one disputes that. But talent without discipline is dangerous. And in a hospital setting, a physician who believes their individual judgment supersedes the systems we have built is a liability I cannot afford." "I have never harmed a patient," she said. "Not yet." The words landed in the room and sat there. She wanted to say something. There was a whole speech inside her about Afghanistan, about what she had seen, about the way she had learned that the gap between a living person and a dead one was often measured not in diagnoses but in seconds, in the willingness to act when acting was the only thing that stood between someone and the dark. She wanted to tell him about the soldier she'd saved in Kandahar with a pen casing and a piece of plastic bag, because that was all she'd had, and that soldier had walked out of that desert, breathing air, and seeing sunlight because she hadn't waited for permission. But she looked at his face, and she understood something she had understood before and kept refusing to accept he was not interested in what she had to say. He had already decided. He slid the paper across the desk. "Effective immediately," he said. She looked at the paper. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading, even though some part of her had been bracing for it for months. Termination of employment. Effective immediately. Reason cited repeated violation of institutional protocol and failure to comply with established chain of command procedures. "You're firing me," she said. "I'm protecting this hospital." "You're protecting yourself." The silence that followed was the loudest she had ever heard. Owen stood up. He straightened his jacket. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Please surrender your badge and your parking credentials at the front desk." He looked at her with something that might have been pity or might have been satisfaction on his face. The two expressions looked almost identical. "I hope you find a situation better suited to your particular approach to medicine, Dr. Grant." She picked up the paper. She folded it once precisely the way she did everything. She put it in the pocket of her lab coat, and she walked out. The nurses at the station saw her face as she passed and went quiet. She heard one of them say her name in a low voice. She didn't stop. She walked to her locker and she took out the small collection of things that constituted her professional life. A photograph of her with her Army unit, a stethoscope that had been a gift from her attending physician in residency, a dog-eared copy of a trauma surgery reference book that she'd carried since med school. She put them in a plastic bag that someone had left folded on the shelf. She surrendered her badge. She did not look at the person behind the desk. She pushed through the front doors of Memorial Hospital and walked out into the California morning, and the sun was bright and indifferent, and the palm trees did not care about her at all. And for the first time in a very long time, Dr. Amelia Grant did not know what to do next. She sat down on a bench outside the entrance, not because she was defeated, not exactly, more because her body needed a moment that her mind was refusing to give it. She held the plastic bag in her lap and she breathed. 6 years of her life. The Army before that, all of it pointing toward this, toward being the doctor she had always known she could be, the kind who got there in time, the kind who didn't let the paperwork decide whether someone got to keep living. And a man with a clipboard and a mahogany desk had drawn a line and told her she had crossed it. She thought about the construction worker. She didn't even know his name, but she knew he was breathing. She knew that somewhere in this building, a man was going to call his wife and tell her he was okay, and his wife was going to cry in the good way, the relieved way. And he was not going to know that it almost hadn't happened, that he had come within 90 seconds of leaving his family without him. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. She had been sitting there for maybe 4 minutes when she heard it. At first, it was just a sound, a low rhythmic thudding that her body recognized before her brain caught up with it. Then her brain caught up with it, and she lifted her head and she looked up at the sky above the hospital. A helicopter. Not a medical helicopter. Not the kind that usually used the rooftop pad at Memorial. This was different. The shape was different. The sound was different. A heavier, more deliberate sound. The sound of military-grade rotors, navy green. No hospital markings. She could see it dropping toward the rooftop, moving with the controlled authority of something that didn't ask permission to land. She stood up. She didn't know why she stood up. She had no reason to care. She was no longer an employee of this hospital. She had a plastic bag of belongings and a termination letter in her pocket and absolutely no professional stake in whatever was happening on that roof. She stood up anyway. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She almost kept walking. She answered. "Dr. Grant?" The voice on the other end was male-controlled and carried the particular cadence of someone who had spent years giving orders in difficult environments. "My name is Lieutenant Commander James Miller, United States Navy. I need to know if you're still at Memorial Hospital." Amelia looked back at the building, looked at the helicopter settling onto the rooftop. Felt something happen in her chest, not fear, not quite, more like recognition, like the tuning fork sound that happens when something resonates with a frequency you've been carrying for a long time. "I was just let go," she said, "as of about 10 minutes ago." There was a pause on the other end, short, then, "Are you physically at the location?" "I'm standing outside the front entrance." "Don't move," he said. "I'll be there in 3 minutes." "Lieutenant Commander." But he had already hung up. She looked at her phone. She looked at the building. She looked at the rooftop where the helicopter had gone quiet, but was still sitting still, present the way military hardware tends to be, with a kind of patient waiting authority. James Miller. She knew that name. She stood very still on the sidewalk outside Memorial Hospital, with a plastic bag of her belongings and a terminated badge, and 6 years of professional life folded in her coat pocket, and she felt the world preparing to shift again. Inside the hospital, through the glass doors, she could see the lobby. She could see the nurses' station. She could see Dr. Richard Owens crossing the lobby, heading somewhere with his clipboard, already moving on to the next thing already finished with her. Her jaw tightened. 3 minutes, the man on the phone had said. She sat back down on the bench. She counted. The automatic doors of Memorial Hospital opened at exactly the 2-minute and 57-second mark, and the man who walked through them was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of efficiency that civilian spaces don't usually produce in people. He was in his late 30s, wearing a Navy flight suit with the insignia of a SEAL unit on the shoulder. His face was angular and serious, and he had a scar, thin and white and clean, that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw. A scar she recognized because she had been the one to close it. He saw her immediately. He walked directly to her, no hesitation, and he stopped in front of the bench and looked at her the way people look at someone they have been thinking about for a long time. "You look exactly the same," he said. "You look like you've had a rough 6 years," she said. Something moved across his face that might have been a smile quickly managed. "We need you, Dr. Grant." "I was just fired." "I know. How do you know?" "We've been monitoring the situation," he said. "We've been watching your career." She stared at him. "That's not unsettling at all." "I apologize for the surveillance. It was precautionary." "Precautionary," she repeated. She stood up. She was almost his height. "What's happening, James?" He glanced toward the hospital, toward the rooftop. "We have a Navy pilot, Commander David Reyes. He went down 2 hours ago in a training exercise over the Pacific. He was recovered, but his injuries are critical. Chest trauma. We have a surgical team en route, but our estimated time to intercept is 47 minutes. The flight surgeon on the extraction team thinks he has 30. She felt it, that shift, that sharpening the frequency, tuning up again. "You need a trauma surgeon." "We need you," he said. "Specifically, you have trauma surgery credentials, combat field surgery experience, and you have operated moving aircraft. You are the only person within range who has all three." "I just lost my hospital privileges." "You haven't lost your medical license," he said. "And under emergency Navy protocols, we have the authority to—" "You have the authority to what?" a voice said behind them. They both turned. Doctor. Richard Owens was standing at the entrance, clipboard still in hand, looking at James Miller with the expression of a man who has encountered an inconvenience and intends to manage it. "This is private hospital property," Owens said. "Whatever you need, you'll need to go through proper channels." James turned to look at him fully. He did it slowly. There was something about the way he moved, the absolute lack of urgency, the absolute presence that made the air feel different. "Doctor Owens," James said. "Lieutenant Commander James Miller, United States Navy. I am not requesting hospital resources. I am requesting a private citizen who happens to be standing on a public sidewalk." Owens's eyes moved to Amelia. "Dr. Grant is no longer affiliated with this institution." "I'm aware," James said. "That's precisely why we're talking to her out here." Owens's jaw worked. "Whatever stunt this is." "A man is dying," Amelia said. Owens looked at her. "A Navy pilot," she continued. "Chest trauma. 30 minutes. And you're standing here worrying about paperwork." She picked up her plastic bag. "I'm not your employee anymore, Dr. Owens. You made that very clear." She looked at James. "Let's go." She walked past Owens without another word. She heard him say something behind her, but she had already crossed the threshold of caring what he said. James fell into step beside her, and they moved through the lobby toward the elevators. And every nurse and orderly and aide they passed went still and watched, and nobody tried to stop them. In the elevator going up, James looked at her. "You're sure?" "Tell me about his injuries," she said. "Bilateral rib fractures, suspected hemothorax on the right side, possible cardiac contusion. He was pulled from the water, so there's secondary concern for pulmonary." "What do I have to work with on the helicopter?" "Limited trauma kit, chest, tube tray, basic anesthesia capabilities. My flight medic is competent but not surgical. IV access. 2 large bore lines, both running." She was already thinking, already calculating. She had done this before, not on a helicopter over the Pacific specifically, but in the back of a Humvee in Kandahar, with a man whose chest had been opened by shrapnel, and whose heart she had held in her hands, literally held it while the vehicle moved over a road that wasn't really a road at all. She had done the impossible before. The elevator doors opened onto the rooftop. The wind hit them immediately warm and carrying the smell of the ocean and fuel. The helicopter sat 20 feet away, rotors beginning to spin up again, and through the open door she could see the flight medic inside bent over a figure strapped to a field litter. 30 minutes, she said. 28 now, James said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in his eyes, she saw something she recognized from another time, another desert, another moment when everything had been on the line and she had been the only one standing between a person and the dark. He trusted her. Completely. Without reservation. The way people trust the only rope when they're hanging from a cliff. She nodded once, and she walked to the helicopter. Behind them from somewhere below, she could have sworn she heard the doors of Memorial Hospital opening again. Heard footsteps, heard Dr. Richard Owens calling her name in a voice that had lost its certainty, that had become something more complicated than command. She didn't look back. She climbed into the helicopter, and the door closed behind her, and the rotors reached full power, and the rooftop of Memorial Hospital fell away beneath them, and the Pacific Ocean opened up ahead in all its vast and different blue, and somewhere out there a man was still breathing, barely waiting for someone to come. She reached for the trauma kit. She got to work. The helicopter banked hard left over the coastline, and Amelia grabbed the overhead strap with one hand and reached for Commander David Reyes's wrist with the other. His pulse was there, weak, thready, the kind of pulse that was more of a suggestion than a commitment, but it was there. For now. "How long has he been this way?" she asked, not looking up from the patient. The flight medic, a young Navy corpsman named Torres, leaned in over her shoulder. He couldn't have been more than 24. His hands were steady, but his eyes were scared. And Amelia had learned long ago that scared eyes told you more about a situation than any monitor. "Since extraction, ma'am, about 40 minutes total. We had him on oxygen, 2 lines running, wide open, but his pressure keeps dropping." "What's it at now?" 82/50. Not good, not catastrophic, not yet, but the direction was wrong. Blood pressure didn't stabilize on its own with injuries like this. It went one way or the other, and right now it was going the wrong way. She pressed her fingers along the right side of his chest. He flinched, which was actually encouraging because it meant he was still registering pain, which meant his brain was still getting enough blood to process sensation. But the flinch also told her what she needed to know. "Hemothorax," she said. "Right side. There's blood in that cavity, probably a liter, maybe more. It's compressing the lung, and it's going to start compressing the heart if it hasn't already." She looked at Torres. "Chest tube tray. Now." "I've never assisted with a chest tube outside it." I know," she said. "I'll walk you through every step. Hand me the tray and don't let go of that IV line." James Miller was in the co-pilot's seat, turned sideways so he could see her. His voice came through the headset she'd been handed when she climbed in. "What do you need from me? Tell your pilot to fly as smooth as he can. No sudden movements. If we hit turbulence while I'm placing this tube, we're going to have a very different problem." "Copy that." He turned forward and spoke to the pilot in a low, controlled voice. The helicopter steadied almost immediately. Amelia felt the change in the airframe, a deliberate smoothing out, the pilot making micro-adjustments she could feel through the deck beneath her knees. Good pilot. She filed that information away with the same efficiency she filed everything. "Torres," she said, "open the tray. Don't touch anything inside it. Just open it." He did. She looked at what she had. It wasn't a hospital chest tube tray. It was a military field kit, which meant it was sparse efficient and designed for people who knew what they were doing without much support. She had worked with worse. She had worked with almost nothing. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." That was minute 4 in the air. They were approximately 23 minutes from the Navy medical ship that was the intended destination. Amelia did the math in her head without flinching. 23 minutes. 82/50 and dropping. A chest cavity filling with blood. She had to drain it here in this aircraft moving over the Pacific Ocean with a scared corpsman and a field kit. She had done harder things. She talked while she worked, not for Torres's benefit alone, but because talking kept her mind ordered, kept the information linear, kept her from slipping into the kind of narrow tunnel focus that sometimes caused people to miss the thing they weren't looking for. Tell me about the accident, she said. Walk me through what happened. James answered from the front. Training exercise. He was running a low-altitude maneuver over water, caught a downdraft, and the aircraft hit the surface before he could recover. He ejected, but the ejection sequence was compromised. Partial deployment. So the impact wasn't just water, she said, the seat mechanism. Correct. The harness caught him wrong. We think the force of the ejection caused the rib fractures and the water impact compounded them. She nodded, filing it away. Rib fractures from high-force ejection plus water impact equaled unpredictable injury patterns. The hemothorax was the obvious problem, but there could be secondary injuries she couldn't see: splenic laceration, liver contusion, aortic shear. She needed to drain the chest cavity, and then she needed to assess everything else she could assess with the tools she had, which were limited, and the time she had, which was less. BP, she said. 79/48, Torres said. Going down. We're moving faster. She said more to herself than anyone. She opened the local anesthetic, drew it up, found the landmark on his chest, 5th intercostal space mid-axillary line, and injected. Reyes hissed through his teeth. His eyes opened for the first time. They were dark brown, she noticed, bloodshot from the impact. He looked at her with the unfocused intensity of someone who was in serious pain, but was trying very hard to be present. Hey, she said. Commander Reyes, I'm Dr. Grant. I'm going to help you. You need to stay as still as you can. Can you do that for me? His lips moved. She leaned closer. Are you Navy? He said. His voice was barely a sound. No, she said, I'm better. Something happened in his eyes. It might have been the beginning of a smile. He closed them again, and she felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not quite. Something more personal. He had a face that reminded her of someone, though she couldn't place who. And the reminder made the stakes feel heavier in the way that personal stakes always do, the way they had always done for her even when protocol said they shouldn't. She made the incision. She worked with the focused silence of someone who has moved past thought and into pure execution. Torres handed her what she asked for when she asked for it, and she was aware of James watching from the front, and she was aware of the ocean beneath them through the small windows, and she was aware of all of it, the way you're aware of everything when your attention is simultaneously total and distributed, the particular cognitive state that combat had taught her and medicine had refined. Blood drained, a lot of blood. Dark venous, the kind that had been pooling for the better part of an hour. She watched it go into the collection chamber, and she counted what she saw, and she recalculated. BP, she said. Pause. 86/52, Torres said. Then a beat later was something that was almost disbelief, 90/55. Going up. James turned in his seat. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and she saw something in his face that was complicated relief, and something else, something older, something that had to do with a different desert in a different kind of crisis, in the specific weight of trusting someone with a life. 14 minutes out, the pilot said over the headset. 14 minutes. His pressure was climbing. He was still in danger. A chest tube in a field kit on a moving helicopter was not a surgical repair, and she knew there could be bleeding. She hadn't addressed an injury she couldn't evaluate without imaging, but the immediate catastrophe was receding. The curve was bending back toward the possible. That was when the monitor alarmed, not the blood pressure monitor, the cardiac monitor. The rhythm on the screen went from a normal sinus pattern to something jagged and irregular in the space of a single heartbeat. Atrial fib, she said, and she was already moving. Do you have amiodarone in that kit? Torres was already going through the drug bag, hands moving fast. Yes, I have it. 150 milligrams IV, push slow, and I need a defibrillator on standby. We have an AED. Get it out. The amiodarone went in. She watched the monitor. 30 seconds. The rhythm stuttered, lurched, and then with the stubborn reluctance of a body that is not quite ready to give up, returned to sinus. Not perfect, not strong, but organized, coordinated. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. You're good, Torres said to her. He said it quietly in the way that young people say things when they have just witnessed something that recalibrated their understanding of what human beings are capable of. You're really, really good. Pay attention to his vitals, she said. Tell me if anything changes. Yes, ma'am, She sat back on her heels and let herself have 3 seconds. Just 3. She looked at Reyes. His chest was moving both sides now. Real symmetrical breathing, and she looked at the collection chamber and the IV lines and the monitor, and she ran through every decision she'd made in the last 12 minutes and checked each one the way a pilot checks instruments after turbulence. Everything held. Everything was right. James's voice came through the headset. 9 minutes out. The ship's medical team is standing by. They have an OR ready. Tell them hemothorax right side chest tube in place, atrial fib converted with amiodarone. Suspected additional rib fractures rule out splenic and hepatic involvement. Cardiac contusion not ruled out. He needs a CT the moment he's stable enough. She heard James relay the information, and she heard the crackle of a response from the ship, and she heard a voice on the other end say something that she caught, only pieces of something that sounded like, "Who is that physician?" And James saying her name, and then a pause, and then nothing more. 8 minutes out. She checked the chest tube. Drainage had slowed significantly, which was good. She checked the BP again, 98/60. Better. She checked his pupils, equal and reactive, which meant his brain was perfusing. She checked his breathing, his skin color, the temperature of his hands. He opened his eyes again. "Still here," she said. "Still here," he agreed in a voice that was a little stronger than before. "Not much, but some." "Do you have family?" she asked. She always asked in these moments. Not because it was in any manual, it wasn't, but because she had learned that connecting a critical patient to something outside their body helped, gave the part of them that was fighting something to fight toward. His mouth moved. "Wife, 2 kids, Mira and Jack." "How old?" 7 and 4. She nodded. "They're going to see you again," she said. "I need you to hold on to that." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were clearer now. Still pained, still exhausted, but present in a way they hadn't been 12 minutes ago. "You were fired," he said. She stared at him. "Excuse me?" "I heard on the radio before they brought me out. I heard them talking. The hospital director fired you. Before you got on." She was quiet for a moment. "That's correct." "But you got on anyway." "Yes." He closed his eyes again. "Why?" She thought about the construction worker that morning. She thought about the termination letter in her pocket still folded neatly. She thought about Richard Owens and his clipboard and his mahogany desk and his certainty that the system he had built was more important than the lives inside it. Because, she said, that's not a reason not to. James turned from the front again. He had heard it. He didn't say anything. He just held her gaze for a moment, and in his face she saw the echo of everything they had been through. Before a different country, a different crisis, the same equation. 5 minutes out, the ship appeared below them, and even through the small windows, she could see the organized movement of people on the deck. The medical team already in position, already prepped the kind of precision that only military medicine at its best could produce. She felt something loosen in her shoulders. Not relief exactly. More like the handing off of a weight, the moment when you have carried something as far as you can carry it alone, and now you are approaching the place where others are ready to take it from you. "Landing in 2, the pilot said. She leaned over Reyes one more time, checked everything once more. All of it holding, all of it right. "You're going to feel a bump," she told him. "That's just the landing. You're okay." He didn't answer this time. He was drifting. Not dangerously, not coding, just the heavy drift of a body that had spent everything it had and was finally allowing itself to rest because the emergency was not at this precise moment requiring it to keep fighting. She kept her hand on his wrist. She counted his pulse the old-fashioned way, the way she had learned in the field before she had learned the high-tech version, and she counted it all the way down to the deck. The helicopter settled with a solid, definitive thud, and the doors opened, and the Navy medical team was there immediately, practiced, no wasted motion, and she moved back to let them work, stepping out of the way with the immediate instinct of someone who knows when their part is done and someone else's has begun. James was beside her on the deck as they watched the team take Reyes. "He's going to make it," James said. "He needs a CT, a surgical consult, probably an OR if there's hepatic bleeding. But his vitals are trending right." She paused. "He's got a good chance." James exhaled. It was a long, controlled exhalation, the kind that takes a lot of practice, self-discipline, to produce the kind that people who hold themselves together under extraordinary pressure, Allow themselves only when the pressure has momentarily released. Amelia, he said. She looked at him. Thank you. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the deck where the team was moving Reyes toward the medical bay. She looked at the ocean around them, vast indifferent in the same Pacific that had nearly taken a man with a wife named Mira and two children who needed their father. She looked at her hands, which were steady, which were always steady, which had done the thing they were built to do. 6 years ago, she said in Kandahar, after you came out of surgery, you told me that if you ever had something worth giving, you'd find a way to give it back. I remember, he said. I think we're even. He shook his head slowly. Not even close. She looked at him. Something in his expression was shifting, moving from relief into something more deliberate. She had the instinct honed from years of reading people in crisis that there was something he hadn't said yet. Something beyond the immediate emergency that had brought him to the rooftop of Memorial Hospital. What else? She said. He turned to face her fully. The Navy has been watching your career for 2 years. So you said. There's a reason for that. It's not just because I owe you my life, though I do. It's because we have a need. A specific, urgent need that your particular combination of skills, is almost uniquely positioned to fill. James. There's a program, he said. A joint military-civilian emergency response unit. We've been developing it for 18 months. Forward-deployed surgical capability, embedded with SEAL extraction teams operating in environments where standard medical infrastructure doesn't exist. The kind of medicine that doesn't wait for the right room, the right equipment, the right authorization. He paused. A kind of medicine you've been practicing your entire career. She was quiet for a long moment. The ship moved gently beneath them, a slow, rolling motion that was almost hypnotic. Who fired you this morning? She said. Who made the call? He blinked. I'm not following. Owens, she said. Was it coincidence that the moment I'm standing on a sidewalk outside Memorial with everything gone, a Navy helicopter lands on the roof? The silence that followed was a fraction of a second too long. She looked at him. James. The timing was not engineered, he said carefully. Reyes' accident was real. His injuries were real. The need was genuine. But he exhaled again. But we had been building toward approaching you for 3 months. We were waiting for the right moment. And when the duty officer pulled your name as the nearest qualified physician with the right clearance profile and your status simultaneously came up as unemployed, she said. Yes. She turned away from him and looked at the ocean. The sun was higher now, burning off the marine layer, turning the water from gray to a deep, specific blue. She thought about the termination letter in her pocket. She thought about Owen's face. She thought about the construction worker breathing and Rhea's breathing and the 700 small moments in her career when she had fought the system to save the person inside it. She thought about what it would mean to work in a place where the system and the person were not in opposition. She turned back. Tell me more about this program, she said. James Miller looked at her with the focused, serious attention of a man who has been preparing for a conversation for a very long time and has just been given permission to have it. It's called Reach Protocol, he said, and you're the only person we've ever considered to run it. The ship moved beneath them. The ocean went on forever in every direction. Somewhere in the medical bay below, David Reyes was being wheeled toward a CT scanner, toward the continuation of his life, toward Mira and Jack and the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old who would get their father back because of the decision Amelia had made on a sidewalk 11 minutes after being told she was nothing. She looked at James Miller. She thought about Richard Owens pressing a termination letter against her face in a hallway. Start from the beginning, she said. Tell me everything. James told her everything. They sat in a small briefing room below deck, 2 cups of coffee between them that neither of them touched, and he laid it out with the methodical clarity of someone who had rehearsed this conversation and was now discovering that the rehearsed version and the real version were not quite the same thing. Because in the rehearsed version, Amelia Grant was a variable, a resource, a highly qualified physician with a specific skill set that fit a specific need. In the real version, sitting across from him with blood still on her scrubs and a termination letter folded in her coat pocket, she was something harder to categorize. Reach Protocol had been conceived 18 months ago by a joint task force of Navy Special Operations Command and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The premise was straightforward in concept and almost impossible in execution. A forward-deployed surgical unit small enough to embed with SEAL extraction teams, mobile enough to reach personnel in environments where conventional medical evacuation was impossible, and skilled enough to provide genuine surgical intervention. Not field stabilization, not triage, not keeping someone alive long enough to hand them off actual surgery in the field in real time. We've had the funding, James said. We've had the equipment design. We've been working on the operational framework for over a year. He paused. What we haven't had is the right physician to lead it. How many candidates did you evaluate? She asked. 47 over 14 months. And none of them fit. 3 came close. One had the surgical skills but no combat experience. One had the combat experience but couldn't function without proper infrastructure. She needed a team equipment-controlled conditions. The third, he stopped. What happened to the third? She said yes, went through 6 weeks of operational training, and then she watched a simulation exercise where a patient died because a command decision delayed extraction by 4 minutes. She handed in her credentials the next morning, said she couldn't operate in a system where military protocol could override medical judgment. Amelia looked at him steadily. She wasn't wrong. No, he said, she wasn't. And that's exactly why I'm sitting here talking to you instead of her. He leaned forward. Reach protocol, the version we're proposing now, has a different command structure. The senior medical officer on any extraction has final authority over all decisions involving patient welfare. Not the team leader, not command. The physician. She was quiet for a moment. That's not how the military works. It's how this program works. It took 14 months and 3 failed candidates to get command to agree to it, but it's in the charter. He slid a folder across the table. Page 7, read the 3rd paragraph. She opened the folder. She read it again. It said in the precise, unglamorous language of military regulatory documents that the senior medical officer embedded with a REACH protocol unit held autonomous clinical authority in all matters pertaining to patient care, superseding rank and operational command structure, when in the medical officer's professional judgment, patient survival required immediate intervention. She set the folder down. Who fought for this language? I did, he said, for 11 months. I called in every favor I had. I referenced every case study I could find of delayed medical intervention causing preventable death. I sat in front of a 3-star admiral and told him about a combat medic in Kandahar who held my heart in her hands. He stopped, cleared his throat. Figuratively. Literally, she said, your pericardium was nicked. I had 2 fingers in your chest for about 40 seconds. He blinked. I didn't know that. You were unconscious. Right. He was quiet for a moment. The point is, I argued that the single largest preventable cause of field fatality in special operations was the gap between the moment a medic identifies a life-saving intervention and the moment command authorizes it. I argued that we needed a physician with the authority to close that gap unilaterally. He met her eyes. I argued it because of you, because of what you did, and because of what I saw you continue to do from a distance for 6 years. Something moved through her. She managed it. What does the role look like practically? He walked her through it. The unit would be small herself, 2 highly trained Navy corpsmen and a logistics specialist. They would operate from a modified aircraft that could be forward deployed to any theater within 12 hours. They would be activated in response to situations where standard medical evacuation was either impossible or would arrive too late. Hostage rescues gone wrong, training accidents in remote locations, classified operations, where standard medevac protocols couldn't be used for security reasons. They would go in with the extraction team, stabilize on site when necessary, and provide surgical intervention en route when necessary. Like today, she said. Today was the proof of concept, he said, in real time, without planning. She looked at the folder, she looked at the coffee she hadn't touched. She thought about the morning the construction worker, the needle Owens's face, the termination letter, the bench outside the hospital, the phone call, the helicopter. She thought about the sequence of it, the strange, brutal logic of it, the way the worst thing that had happened to her today had led directly to the most interesting conversation she had ever had. I need to know something, she said, and I need a straight answer. Ask, Owens, did you know he was going to fire me? James held her gaze. We knew it was coming. We didn't know when. His file, his professional conduct history indicated a pattern of terminating physicians who acted outside protocol. You were on his list. We knew that. And you didn't warn me. We couldn't. Any contact from us before today would have compromised the independence of your decision. We needed you to choose this without pressure from us. Watching someone get fired isn't pressure. Watching someone get fired, he said carefully, is watching someone get freed. The silence that followed was long enough to be uncomfortable, which meant it was exactly long enough to be honest. She stood up. She walked to the far side of the room and back the way she always did when she needed to think on her feet. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, the same pacing motion she'd used in hospital corridors and on FOBs in Afghanistan and in every narrow, high-stakes space she'd ever occupied. If I say yes, she said, still moving, I'm walking away from civilian medicine, from everything I built. What you built got dismantled this morning by a man with a clipboard. That's not the point. Then what is, she stopped. The point is that I spent 6 years trying to change the system from inside it, trying to prove that a doctor who acts on instinct rather than protocol isn't a liability, she's an asset. And every time I got close to making that case, someone like Owens redrew the line. She looked at him. You're telling me there's a place where that argument is already won, where the line is already drawn into my favor? I'm telling you exactly that. Then why does it feel like the beginning of a different trap? He didn't answer immediately. She respected that. A quick answer to that question would have been a dishonest one, and she had enough respect for James Miller, and he had enough respect for her that they were past the stage of convenient answers. Because anything worth doing feels like a trap at the beginning, he said finally. Because you've been burned enough times that trust is a risk you weigh carefully. And because, and this is the honest answer, I can't guarantee you that REACH protocol will be everything it's designed to be. Bureaucracy exists in the military too. Politics exist. People with agendas exist. What I can guarantee you is that the framework we've built gives you more authority over your patients than any civilian hospital will ever give you. And that I will personally go to the mat for that framework every single time someone tries to erode it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I want to see Reyes. He nodded, no argument, no detour. He stood up and let her out. The medical bay was quiet in the specific way of rooms where serious things have recently happened, and the urgency has passed but hasn't fully dissolved. Reyes was post-CT, post-consult, waiting for the surgical team's decision on whether he needed an OR or whether the chest tube and stabilization were sufficient to monitor conservatively. The attending ship's physician, a lieutenant commander named Chen, who had the efficient manner of someone very good at a very hard job, met them at the door. Dr. Grant, Chen said, and he said it with something in his voice that Amelia recognized from certain colleagues over the years. Not admiration exactly, more like professional acknowledgement. The nod between people who understand what the other person has done and what it cost them to do it. His CT is back. Hemothorax is draining well through the tube you placed. No hepatic or splenic involvement. The cardiac contusion is mild, we'll monitor. No surgical intervention indicated at this time. The atrial fib, converted and holding, sinus rhythm since the amiodarone on board. He paused. That was good work, Dr. Grant, in those conditions. Is he awake? In and out. You can have 5 minutes. She went in. James waited at the door. She walked to the bedside and Reyes opened his eyes when he heard her footsteps. The way patients in pain always hear footsteps differently, with more attention, more hope, more awareness. That footsteps means someone is coming, and someone coming means things might change. Dr. Grant, he said. His voice was stronger. Not strong, but stronger. The difference mattered. Commander Reyes, your CT came back clean, no surgery. You're going to be sore for about 6 weeks, and you're grounded for at least 2 months, and your wife is going to tell you she told you so every single day of that recovery period, but you're going to be fine. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in his face had changed, loosened, released the particular emotional unlocking that happens when a person is told they are not going to die today. Mara and Jack, he said. Go home to them, she said. That's your only job right now. He reached out and caught her wrist. Not hard, he barely had the strength for it, but deliberate. Thank you, he said. I mean it. What you did up there. He stopped. His jaw worked. I know what you walked away from to do it. She looked at him. You heard more than I realize. Military channels talk, he said. I heard them trying to reach Naval Medical. I heard James's team pulling your name. I heard, he stopped again. I heard enough. You didn't have to get on that helicopter. Yes, I did, she said simply. He let go of her wrist. He sank back against the pillow with the controlled release of a body that has been holding tension for hours and is finally cautiously beginning to let go of it. Whatever they're asking you to do, he said, say yes. She didn't answer that. She gave his hand a brief professional squeeze, and she walked back out. In the corridor, James was on his phone. She could tell from his posture, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the way his free hand went still at his side, that the call was significant. He said 3 words into the phone, listened for 10 seconds, said 2 more and hung up. He turned to her. His face had changed. What? She said. Memorial Hospital, he said. There's been a development. She stared at him. What kind of development? The construction worker you saved this morning, the one in the hallway before Owens fired you. His name is Frank DeLuca. He's 53 years old, he has 4 kids, and apparently he has a nephew who works for the San Diego Tribune. She felt something cold move through her. Not fear, something more like the recognition of a wave you see coming from a distance and understand is going to be large. What did they print? Nothing yet. But the nephew posted on social media about an hour ago a full account of what happened, the save in the hallway, the firing of the helicopter. He works in the hospital. He saw all of it. James paused. It has 400,000 shares. The number landed in the room and took up space. She said nothing for a long moment. 400,000 shares in an hour. She thought about Owens in his mahogany office, and she thought about the pink termination letter, and she thought about every patient she'd ever fought for and every line she'd ever crossed to get to them in time. And she thought about the particular cruelty of a system that punishes people for saving lives and calls that cruelty protocol. Is Owens aware? She asked. The hospital's PR department has issued a statement supporting his decision, citing institutional protocol, physician oversight, the importance of chain of command. James watched her face. The comments are not receptive to the statement. She almost laughed. It wasn't a happy almost laugh. It was the sound a person makes when something deeply absurd intersects with something deeply real, and the combination is almost too much to process in a straight line. I don't want this to be a media story, she said. I didn't do it for... I know why you did it, he said. But Amelia, 400,000 people in an hour, that's not something you control anymore. She pressed her fingers against her temple. This was the part she had never been good at, the aftermath, the public dimension, the way that private acts of conscience had a tendency to become public property once they crossed a certain threshold. She had spent 6 years keeping her head down, doing the work, trying to change things quietly. And one morning had undone all of that. Or maybe she thought one morning had done all of that, depending on how you looked at it. Her phone buzzed. She had almost forgotten she had it. She looked at the screen. 12 missed calls, 6 text messages, an email from a number she didn't recognize with the subject line, Board of Directors, Memorial Hospital request for urgent conversation. She looked at James. The board is calling me. I know, he said. They've been trying to reach you for 40 minutes. My team has been managing your phone. She stared at him. Your team has been managing my phone. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Screening, not intercepting. We wanted to make sure you had the space to... James. Her voice was level, very level. The particular levelness that in her case was a warning. My phone. I apologize. It was an operational overreach. It won't happen again. She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked down at the messages. She scrolled through them. The board's email was formal and urgent and carefully worded in the way that institutional communications become carefully worded when institutions realize they have made an error of the kind that attracts public attention. The language talked about reassessing the circumstances and reviewing Dr. Owens's decision and the board's commitment to physician excellence in patient-centered care. She had read documents like this before. Institutions didn't write them because they had had a change of heart. They wrote them because 400,000 people had shared something and the number was still climbing. They want me back, she said. They want the problem to go away, James said, which from their perspective looks like wanting you back, for now. And Owens, Still the director, still insisting he acted correctly. James paused. Though I'm told his morning has been extremely unpleasant. She thought about what it would feel like to walk back into Memorial Hospital, to accept the offer that was being implied between the formal lines of that email, to return to the same hallways, the same battles, the same machinery that had spent 6 years grinding against everything she was. She thought about page 7, paragraph 3 of the REACH protocol charter. She looked at James. If I accept the board's offer and go back to Memorial, REACH protocol needs someone else. Yes. And if there is no one else, there is no one else, he said. That's not a recruitment pitch. That is the factual result of 14 months of evaluation. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at the closed door of the medical bay behind which David Reyes was lying in a bed he was going to get out of walking toward, a life he was going to continue living because of what had happened in a helicopter over the Pacific 40 minutes ago. I need an hour, she said. Take 2, he said. The board can wait. They're very good at waiting when they're nervous. She walked, not anywhere specifically along the corridors of the ship up to the deck into the salt air and the sound of the ocean. She walked the way she always walked when she needed to think, which was fast and without destination, letting her body move while her mind worked through the architecture of a decision. On one side, Memorial Hospital, which was offering her return under pressure she hadn't asked for and didn't fully trust in a system that had proven that very morning exactly what it thought of her when the cameras weren't watching. On the other side, a program that didn't fully exist yet, built on a framework she hadn't verified, led by a man she trusted but hadn't worked with in 6 years, operating in environments that would make this morning's helicopter surgery look like a routine outpatient procedure. She stopped at the railing and looked at the water. She thought about something her Army commanding officer had told her in the 3rd week of her deployment when she had been 26 years old and terrified in the specific way of people who are not afraid of dying, but are profoundly afraid of failing. He had told her the right decision is almost never the comfortable one, but you can usually identify it because it's the one that makes every cell in your body go quiet. She stood at the railing. She waited. Everything went quiet. She turned around and walked back. James was where she'd left him, in the corridor outside the medical bay, and he looked up when he heard her coming. He read her face before she spoke. She could see him do it, the quick assessment of someone who has spent his career learning to read situations correctly because incorrect readings had consequences. You're sure, he said. One condition, she said. Name it. The board's offer. I want to respond to it personally, in writing, and I want to be specific about why I'm declining. Something moved through his expression. Respect, she thought. The real kind, not the performed kind. I can arrange that. And I want it public, she said. Whatever they do with it on their end, the letter goes public. I'm not doing this quietly. 6 years of doing things quietly accomplished exactly one thing, which is that Owens felt safe enough to throw a termination letter at my face in front of a hallway full of people. James nodded slowly. Understood. REACH protocol, she said. Tell me the start date. He looked at her for a long moment. Then the thing that might have been a smile, the controlled managed version, crossed his face. We were hoping for 3 weeks. Given today's proof of concept, I think I can make a case for accelerating. Make the case, she said, and James... She stopped. Yeah. The next time your team screens my phone, I find out about it before it happens, not after. Agreed, he said without hesitation. She nodded once. She turned and looked down the corridor, and she thought about what came next, the letter she would write, the response. She would get the fight that was going to come. Because fights always came. That was the nature of systems when individuals pushed against them. She thought about REACH protocol and everything it was supposed to be and might or might not become. She thought about David Reyes and his daughter Mira and his son Jack and the 7 and the 4 and the man who was going to go home to them because she had gotten on a helicopter. She thought about Richard Owens and his mahogany desk and his certainty that he had won, and she thought not yet, not even close. She wrote the letter on a Navy-issue legal pad sitting at the small desk in the briefing room where James had laid out the REACH protocol folder 2 hours earlier. The coffee was still there cold now, and she still didn't touch it. She wrote by hand because she had always thought better by hand, because the physical act of forming words slowed her brain just enough to make the words precise rather than reactive, and precision was what this required. She wrote 4 drafts. The first was too angry. The second was too measured clinical in a way that drained the truth out of it. The third was close, but ended in a place that felt like an appeal, and she was not appealing to anyone. The fourth was the one. It was 2 pages. It addressed the board of directors of Memorial Hospital by name, all 11 of them. It thanked them for their communication and declined their offer to return clearly, without ambiguity, without the softening language that institutions used when they wanted to leave doors open for themselves. Then it did something that the board's email had not done. It told the truth. It described the construction worker in the hallway. It described the 90-second window. It described the needle and the hiss of released air, and the man's color returning from gray-blue to living. It described Dr. Richard Owens's arrival and his words and the specific sequence of events that followed. It described without editorializing what it felt like to have a termination letter pressed against your face while the man you just saved was gasping his first real breath 10 feet away. And then it said in the 4th paragraph, in plain language, this is not about me. This is about every patient who will come through the doors of Memorial Hospital next week and the week after, and for as long as the current administrative culture remains intact. This is about the physician who will stand in that hallway next time with 90 seconds in the knowledge and the instrument and will hesitate because of what happened to me and will pick up the phone to call for authorization instead and will listen to it ring and will watch the window close. The last paragraph was 6 sentences. It said she was moving on. It said she wished the institution the capacity for honest self-examination. It said that capacity, if it arrived, would do more for its patients than any single physician. And it said in the final sentence that she hoped the board understood the difference between a doctor who violated protocol and a doctor who chose a human life over a piece of paper, because that difference was the entire moral argument, and the institution's inability to see it was not a procedural failure, but a failure of purpose. She folded it. She addressed it to all 11 board members. And she gave it to James, who gave it to a communications officer who would handle the release when she was ready. "When do you want it out?" James asked. "Tonight," she said. "After business hours. I want them to read it at home." He nodded. "Understood." That was hour 3 on the ship. By hour 4, David Reyes was sitting up. She went back to check on him. Not because it was her professional obligation anymore. Chen and his team had full custody of the patient now. But because she needed to see it. The sitting up. The proof that the things she had done in the air had continued to hold. There was a particular kind of reassurance that only the sight of a living person could provide, and she had learned not to be embarrassed about needing it. He was sitting up. He had color. His wife was on a video call on a tablet propped against his water pitcher, and Amelia heard the wife's voice tight with the aftermath of fear, the specific vocal quality of someone who has spent several hours not knowing, and is now knowing, and the body hasn't caught up yet, saying something in a low, rapid stream that Amelia didn't try to make out. Reyes saw Amelia in the doorway and held up a finger one moment. He said something to his wife. The wife looked up toward the tablet camera, and her face went through something complicated. She was a woman of maybe 35, dark-haired, with the alert eyes of someone who had not slept and had been crying, and was currently holding herself together with the specific discipline of mothers who refuse to fall apart until they know their children can't see them do it. "Is that her?" the wife said. Reyes looked at Amelia. "Yeah, that's her." The wife looked directly into the camera. "Dr. Grant," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word just slightly, the crack of a wall that has been holding pressure for too long. "Thank you. I need you to know my kids still have their father because of you. Mira, she's 7. She doesn't fully understand what happened, but she made a picture." The wife held up a piece of paper covered in crayon. A figure in blue, a doctor, identifiable by the scribbled stethoscope, standing next to a larger figure in green. She called it the doctor who flew. Amelia stood into the doorway and looked at the crayon drawing on the screen, and something happened in her chest that she didn't fully manage. She didn't try particularly hard to manage it. "Tell Mira I said thank you," she said. "That's the best title I've ever had." She left before she said anything less useful. In the corridor, she stood with her back against the wall for exactly 30 seconds. Then she straightened up and kept moving, because that was what she did. James was waiting for her at the end of the corridor. He had a look on his face that she was learning to read a specific quality of controlled alertness that meant something new had happened, and he was calibrating how to tell her. "What?" she said. "Owens called the Navy," he said. "Specifically, he called Naval Medical Command." He's filed a formal complaint alleging that we used unauthorized protocols to recruit an unaffiliated civilian physician, that you practice medicine without current hospital privileges, and that the REACH protocol program violated 3 separate federal medical practice statutes. She stared at him. Is any of that valid? The legal team is reviewing it. The short answer is his complaint has no jurisdictional weight over military emergency medical protocols, and the specific statutory references he cited apply to civilian medical practice, not federally authorized military medical operations. He paused. The longer answer is that he has a lawyer, the lawyer is aggressive, and the board, which told you this morning they were reassessing, has apparently reversed that position in the last 90 minutes. Because Owens pushed back. Because Owens threatened a wrongful termination counterclaim against the board if they reversed his decision. And because he apparently has leverage over 2 of the board members that nobody disclosed to us initially. He said the last part with a particular flatness that told her it bothered him considerably more than his tone suggested. She absorbed this. The wave she'd seen coming on the ship's deck was larger than she'd thought. This was no longer a story about a fired doctor and a Navy helicopter. This was becoming a legal dispute, an institutional power struggle, and a public relations war all at once, all moving at the speed of the internet, which was to say the speed of everything bad happening simultaneously. What leverage, she said. One board member has a son who was treated at Memorial 2 years ago. The treatment records contain information that Owens apparently has access to and has communicated his willingness to protect as long as the board continues to support his leadership decisions. The word for what Owens was doing was not protocol violation. The word was extortion. She said it out loud. He's extorting them. That word would require legal establishment, James said carefully. But the description is not inaccurate. She felt something that was not quite anger. Anger was too simple, too hot. This was colder. The specific cold of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of a thing they had previously only partially seen. For 6 years, she had believed Owens was a bureaucrat, a rigid, self-protective, protocol-obsessed administrator who genuinely, if wrongly, believed that the rules he enforced were the rules worth enforcing. She had thought he was wrong. She had not thought he was corrupt. This was different. James, she said, the letter, the one I wrote. It hasn't gone out yet. I have it. Hold it, she said. Don't release it until I say. He looked at her. Why? Because I'm rewriting the last paragraph. He held her gaze. Then he nodded. She went back to the briefing room. She got out another sheet of paper. She rewrote the last paragraph. The new version said the same thing the old one said, but it added one sentence that she would be making herself available to the appropriate oversight authorities to discuss the full circumstances of her termination, including any relevant information that came to her attention regarding the administrative conduct of Memorial Hospital's executive leadership. It was not an accusation, it was a signal, and the people who needed to understand it would understand it. She gave the revised letter back to Baumüsers at 4:47 p.m. Now, she said, he sent it. By 6:15, it had been picked up by 3 news outlets. By 7 o'clock, it was on the front page of the Tribune's digital edition, with a headline that she hadn't written and wouldn't have chosen, but could not argue was inaccurate. By 8:30, a former Memorial Hospital board member who had resigned 3 years ago, a woman named Dr. Patricia Sosa, who had left under circumstances that had been described at the time as a difference of vision, had given an interview to a local television station in which she described a pattern of administrative conduct at Memorial that was, in her words, deeply troubling and had been, in her experience, an open secret among hospital leadership for years. Amelia watched the interview on a tablet in the ship's wardroom. She watched it twice. Sosa was in her 60s, small, precise, and furious in the controlled, devastating way of someone who has been waiting for the right moment for a long time and has just decided it has arrived. Owens has operated this hospital as a personal fiefdom for 9 years, Sosa said on the screen. The board has allowed it because questioning him was expensive professionally, personally, and in at least 2 cases that I'm aware of legally. I resigned because I was not willing to be part of an institution that placed administrative self-protection above patient welfare. Dr. Grant's situation is not an aberration. It is the system working exactly as Owens designed it to work. The interviewer asked, "Do you believe Dr. Owens's termination of Dr. Grant was retaliatory?" Sosa looked directly into the camera. I believe, she said, that Richard Owens fired Amelia Grant because she saved a man's life and made him feel small. And I believe that if we allow that to stand, we are telling every physician in this country that their first obligation is to the administrator above them, not the patient in front of them. That is not medicine. That is not a hospital. That is a hierarchy protecting itself, and it needs to end. James sat down across from her as the interview ended. He had a look on his face that she couldn't entirely read. The board is meeting tonight, he said. Emergency session. Started 40 minutes ago. How do you know? We have awareness of relevant developments. She decided not to pursue that particular thread. What's on their agenda? 2 items. 1, a formal review of Owens's conduct. 2, he paused, a discussion of the complaint he filed against Reach Protocol and against you personally. They're still pursuing the complaint. Owens is pushing them too. Whether they'll comply is in motion. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the tablet screen, frozen now on Sosa's face. She thought about the board meeting happening in real time in a room she couldn't see with 11 people she had never spoken to directly deciding the shape of the next several chapters of her professional life. She thought about the fact that she had already made her decision. She had made it on the deck of this ship looking at the ocean when everything went quiet. The board meeting was important, the complaint was important, the legal question was important, but none of it changed the fundamental calculation. She was going to reach protocol. That was decided. What the board meeting decided was something different, something that mattered to the people who came after her, to the next physician who stood in a hallway with 90 seconds and a needle, and a man who was dying. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. An unknown number, different from James, different from anyone she recognized. She answered, Dr. Grant. The voice was male, older, with the measured delivery of someone accustomed to choosing words carefully. My name is Gerald Park. I am the chairman of Memorial Hospital's board of directors. I apologize for the hour. She said nothing. I've read your letter, Park continued. I want to be direct with you because I think you're someone who appreciates directness. A pause. The board is in session currently. There are significant matters under discussion. I'm calling you privately outside the formal process because I believe you deserve to know what is happening in real time. What is happening, she said. Dr. Owens has been placed on administrative leave effective 1 hour ago, pending a full review of his conduct, including the circumstances of your termination and several additional matters that have come to our attention in the last several hours. Another pause, longer this time. The complaint he filed against the Navy program and against you personally has been withdrawn. The board will not be pursuing it. She absorbed this slowly. She had expected a fight. She had prepared for a long, ugly, drawn-out institutional battle. She had not expected it to move this fast. Why are you telling me this personally, she said. Why not through the formal communication? Because the formal communication will say certain things in certain ways, Park said. And I wanted you to also hear the informal version, which is this: we failed you. This board, in its failure to properly supervise our executive leadership, created the conditions that allowed today to happen. And I am personally deeply sorry for that. She sat with the apology for a moment. It was not a small thing coming from a chairman of a hospital board. It was also not, she noted, the thing she needed most. Mr. Park, she said, your apology is noted, and I believe it's sincere. But what I need from you is not an apology. What I need is for the board to understand, not just today in the middle of a public crisis, but structurally permanently, that what happened this morning cannot happen again. Not to me, to anyone. We're committed to, I've heard institutional commitments before, she said quietly. What I'm asking about is structural change. Independent oversight of termination decisions involving clinical conduct, a formal appeals process with external review, a physician advocate position on the board itself with voting rights. She paused. Those aren't ideas I came up with tonight. I've been carrying them for 3 years. Silence on the other end. Then those are significant structural changes. Yes, she said, they are. Another silence, longer. She let it sit. She didn't fill it with reassurance or softening. She let it sit and waited. We would need to discuss them through the proper governance process, Park said finally. But I can tell you that this board in its current state of awareness would not dismiss them. Then put them on the agenda, she said, in writing, before the meeting closes tonight. Dr. Grant? His voice shifted slightly. I have to ask, and this is not a formal question, only a personal one, is there any possibility you would reconsider joining us, given the changes we're prepared to make? She looked at James across the table. He had been listening, reading her face. He raised an eyebrow, her call entirely no pressure. No, she said into the phone. I've made my decision. But the person who comes after me, the physician who takes whatever position emerges from these changes, they deserve to walk into a different hospital than the one I spent 6 years trying to survive. So please make the changes. Not for me, for them. Park was quiet for a moment. Understood, he said. Good luck, Dr. Grant. I hope whatever comes next is worthy of you. She ended the call. The wardroom was quiet. James was watching her. Owens is on leave, she said. I heard. The complaint is withdrawn. I heard that too. She set the phone down on the table and looked at her hands. They were, as always, steady. They had been steady when she drove a needle into a dying man's chest in a hallway, and steady when she placed a chest tube in a moving helicopter over the Pacific, and steady now sitting in a wardroom at almost 9 in the evening on what had been, by any reasonable measure, the most consequential day of her professional life. He's not gone, she said. Owens, administrative leave isn't removal. No, James agreed, it isn't. The board will get nervous in 6 weeks when the media attention fades. They'll start calculating what it costs them to go all the way versus what it costs them to quietly reinstate him with conditions. Probably. So the structural changes matter more than Owen's personal outcome, she said. If the changes are real, the independent oversight, the appeals process, the physician advocate, then it doesn't matter whether Owens comes back or not. The system is different. And if the changes aren't real, she looked at him. Then Sosa goes back on camera. I answer every question the oversight authority asks in full detail, and the board discovers that administrative leave was the least of their problems. She paused. I made that reasonably clear. Something moved across James's face. This time it was not the almost smile. It was something more complete than that. Can I ask you something, he said. Ask. 6 years ago in Kandahar, after I came out of the surgery, you sat with me for about an hour while the rest of the team was debrief. I was in and out. I don't remember most of it, but I remember you were still there when I came back around, and I asked you why you hadn't left, and you said. He stopped. Do you remember what you said? She thought back. She had been 28 years old, sitting on an equipment case in a forward operating base with blood on her boots, watching a man breathe who had not been breathing when they brought him in. I said the shift wasn't over, she said. You said the shift wasn't over, he confirmed. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone completing a thought they have been carrying for a long time. I've been thinking about that for 6 years, about what it means to be the kind of person who stays not because of obligation or protocol or because someone is watching, but because the shift isn't over until the person is safe. She looked at him. James. That is the operating philosophy of REACH protocol, he said. The thing I could not put in a charter document or a mission statement or a funding proposal. The thing that 47 candidates over 14 months either had or didn't have. He held her gaze. You have it. You've always had it, and no board meeting, no termination letter, no Richard Owens was ever going to take it out of you. The wardroom was very quiet. She looked at the tablet on the table with Sosa's frozen face on the screen. She looked at the folder with the REACH protocol charter. She looked at James Miller, who had a scar on his jaw that she had closed with her own hands 6 years ago, and who had spent 14 months and 47 candidates and 11 months of fighting with a 3-star admiral, building something specific and difficult and real for reasons that had started with a combat medic sitting on an equipment case in Afghanistan saying the shift wasn't over. When do we start? She said. Report to Naval Medical Center, San Diego, Monday morning, he said. 0800. That's 3 days. Is that a problem? She thought about her apartment, which she had not been to since Friday. She thought about the plastic bag with her belongings from the locker, which was still sitting somewhere on the ship probably, or in the helicopter, she wasn't sure. She thought about the things she needed to do in 3 days. Find somewhere to live. That was closer to the base, notify the licensing board of her change in practice setting, call her mother who had been leaving messages since the social media post, and whose messages she had been reading and not answering because her mother would cry. And when her mother cried, Amelia cried, and today was not a day she could afford to cry until it was over. No, she said. 3 days is fine. Good. He stood up. I'll have someone arrange transport back to the mainland. Tonight if you want. Tonight, she said. Yes. She stood up too. She picked up the REACH protocol folder and held it under her arm. She looked around the wardroom once the cold coffee, the legal pad with its crossed-out drafts, the tablet screen, and she felt something that she recognized with some surprise as the precise opposite of the feeling she'd had sitting on a bench outside Memorial Hospital at 8:09 that morning with a plastic bag in her lap and the sun being indifferent. That feeling had been the end of something. This was the beginning. She followed James out of the wardroom and down the corridor, and somewhere above them, the sky was going dark over the Pacific, and somewhere in a hospital in San Diego, a board meeting was still in session. And somewhere in that same hospital, a man named Frank DeLuca was breathing real air with both lungs and had no idea that the woman responsible for that was walking toward a helicopter with a military charter folder under her arm. In 3 days until everything changed. She did not look back at the wardroom. The shift wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The helicopter touched down at Naval Air Station North Island at 10:43 p.m., and Amelia stepped onto the tarmac with the REACH protocol folder under her arm, and 3 days of adrenaline beginning finally to metabolize into something that felt like exhaustion. Not the bad kind, the kind that comes after you have done everything that needed doing, and the body is presenting its invoice. James had arranged a car. A young petty officer named Vargas drove her to a Navy guest quarters building on the base, handed her a key card and told her there was food in the commissary until 11 if she needed it. She thanked him. She did not go to the commissary. She sat on the edge of the bed in the small clean room, and she called her mother. Her mother answered on the first ring, which meant she had been holding the phone. Amelia Grace Grant, her mother said, and the use of the middle name was not anger. It was relief so intense it had run out of other ways to express itself. I have been watching the news for 6 hours. I'm fine, Mom. You were on a Navy helicopter. They said you performed surgery. A chest tube. It's a procedure, not surgery. Don't you minimize things at me right now. I am your mother. Mom. There was a sound on the other end that Amelia recognized as her mother sitting down hard in her kitchen chair, the one that creaked. Are you safe? Are you somewhere safe? I'm on a Navy base. I'm extremely safe. Are you eating? I will eat. That's not what I asked. She smiled despite herself. I haven't eaten since this morning. I will fix that. Good. A pause. The creak of the chair adjusting. They fired you, her mother said, and now her voice was different, quieter, and carrying something heavy. I saw it. On the news, they showed the hospital, and they showed that man's face, the director, and they showed what he said. Baby, I'm so sorry. Don't be, Amelia said. It turned out to be the best thing that happened to me today. How can you say that? Because the second best thing was a Navy pilot who's going home to his kids. And the firing is the reason I was available to make that happen. She paused. I'm starting something new, Mom. Something I think I've been building toward for a long time without knowing it. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Is it dangerous? Some of it. Is it right? She thought about page 7, paragraph 3. She thought about the shift isn't over. She thought about Mira's crayon drawing the doctor who flew. Yes, she said, it's right. Her mother exhaled, long and slow. Then you do it, she said. You do it all the way. Don't you dare do it halfway. I never do anything halfway. No, her mother said softly. You never have. She fell asleep at 11:15 with the folder on the nightstand and her phone on the pillow, and she slept the way she always slept after high-stakes days deeply, without dreaming the sleep of a system that has spent everything and needs to rebuild before the next demand arrives. She woke at 5:40 a.m. to 3 things simultaneously, her alarm. A text from James that said, board meeting concluded, RID attached, and a missed call from a number she didn't recognize with a Los Angeles area code. She read James's attached summary first. The board meeting had ended at 12:17 a.m. The formal outcomes were as follows. Dr. Richard Owens's administrative leave had been converted to a suspension with pay pending a full independent investigation into his conduct. The 3 structural changes she had specified on the phone with Chairman Park: independent oversight of termination decisions, a formal appeals process with external review, and a physician advocate with board voting rights had all been formally placed on the agenda for the next governance meeting with a commitment to resolve them within 60 days. And the board had issued a public statement released at 12:30 a.m., which said in its third paragraph the following: "The board acknowledges that the termination of Dr. Amelia Grant on Monday, April 2nd was handled improperly and did not reflect the values this institution is committed to upholding. We extend our sincere apology to Dr. Grant and to the patients and staff who witnessed these events." She read it twice. Then she set the phone down and sat with it. It wasn't everything. Owens was still being paid. The structural changes were promised, not implemented. The investigation was independent in name and might or might not be independent in practice. She had been in medicine long enough to know the distance between institutional commitment and institutional follow-through. But it was something. It was the board in writing in public at 12:30 a.m., saying the words it had never said to any of the physicians Owens had pushed out before her. And that mattered. Not because it undid the morning. Nothing undid the morning, but because the physician who came after her would walk into a building where those words had been said and could not be unsaid, and that was different from the building she had walked into 6 years ago. She got up. She showered. She called the Los Angeles number. A woman answered. "Dr. Grant, thank you for calling back. My name is Carolyn Marsh. I'm a producer with National Public Health Media. We've been following your story since yesterday afternoon. I'd like to talk with you about an interview, a long-form piece on physician autonomy, institutional accountability, and emergency medicine. We're very interested in the structural changes you've proposed for Memorial's governance, and we'd like to understand the broader implications." Amelia listened. She thought. "I'm not interested in being a public story," she said. "I understand," Marsh said, "but I'd argue you already are one. What you have the ability to choose now is whether the story gets told accurately and substantively, or whether it gets simplified into a 30-second clip and forgotten in a week." That was a fair point, and Amelia had enough respect for fair points to acknowledge them even when they were inconvenient. "After Monday," she said. "Call me after Monday. I start a new position and I need to do that without a camera." "Of course," Marsh said. "I'll reach out Tuesday. Thank you, Dr. Grant." She hung up and went to find the commissary and ate scrambled eggs and toast and drank the best coffee she'd had in days, which was not saying much because it was commissary coffee, but her threshold for quality was currently calibrated entirely by need. At 7:30, James found her. He came into the commissary in his flight suit, looking like someone who had also not slept much, but was managing it with military efficiency. He got coffee, sat across from her, and said without preamble, "How are you fed?" she said. "That's an improvement." "Did you see the board statement?" "Yes." "Your response?" She thought about it. "It's a beginning," she said. "Not an ending. I'll be watching what they do in 60 days. He nodded. "There's something else, about Owens." He said it carefully, the way he said things that required care. "Tell me." "And the independent investigation is going to be broader than the board publicly stated. There are 3 former Memorial physicians who have already reached out to the investigator proactively without being contacted and provided documented accounts of conduct they experienced under Owens's administration. One of them was pushed out 5 years ago after performing an emergency cesarean that saved a mother's life but violated Owens's authorization protocols. She's been waiting for this moment for 5 years. Amelia set down her coffee cup. He's been doing this for 5 years. At minimum, probably longer. She felt the cold thing again. The specific cold of understanding the full size of a wrong you had only previously seen part of. 5 years. Longer. How many physicians? How many moments in hallways, at bedsides, in trauma bays, where the window had been there, and the physician had hesitated, and the window had closed, and the number on the monitor had changed. "They need to hear from all of them," she said. "Every physician he did this to. The investigation needs to be complete." "The investigator is a former federal prosecutor," James said. "She's very thorough." "Good." She picked up her coffee again. "Good." They sat for a moment in the particular companionable quiet of people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of the immediate crisis and learning what the other side feels like. "There's something I didn't tell you yesterday," James said. She looked at him. "James, we talked for 6 hours yesterday." "I know, this is something I held back intentionally, and I want to explain why before I say it." She waited. "Reach protocol," he said, "the program. Your role in it, when I said you're the only person we've considered for the leadership position, that was true. But I didn't tell you the full context of what that means operationally. He paused. The first deployment is in 11 days. She stared at him. 11 days. There's a situation developing in the Pacific Theater that we can't discuss in full detail outside a secure briefing, but the short version is that there are 7 Navy personnel in an area where standard medevac is not an option, and one of them has a medical history that makes the probability of a critical event in the next 3 weeks significantly elevated. We need REACH protocol operational. Now, not in 3 months. Now. You were going to tell me this when, after you had 24 hours, he said, after you'd slept and eaten and made the decision without the pressure of an operational deadline. She looked at him. That's why the Monday start date. It wasn't administrative. The Monday start date is a compressed onboarding. 2 days of classified briefings, equipment, familiarization, meet your team, operational by Thursday. She absorbed this. 11 days from now, she could be in the Pacific Theater with a field kit and 2 Navy corpsmen in a situation she didn't yet have the details of. 11 days from the morning that had started with a construction worker in a hallway and a termination letter pressed against her face. Tell me about the team, she said. He did. The 2 corpsmen assigned to REACH protocol were named Dominguez and Park. No relation to the board chairman. He noted both with combat deployment experience, both cross-trained and surgical assisted, both selected from a pool of 40 candidates over 8 months. The logistics specialist was a woman named Chief Petty Officer Sandra Okafor, who had 18 years of experience in special operations support and who James described as, quote, the most competent human being in any room she enters. And I include surgeons and admirals in that assessment. And the aircraft, Amelia asked, modified MH-60S, expanded medical bay, enhanced avionics for night and low visibility operations, extended range fuel system. You'll have more to work with than you had yesterday. Not a hospital, but considerably more than a field kit. I'll want to see the medical inventory before Thursday. It'll be ready for you tomorrow morning. She nodded. She finished her coffee. She looked at the empty plate in front of her and thought about the sequence of the last 18 hours, the needle in the hallway, Owens's face, the bench, the phone call, the helicopter, the chest tui, at altitude, Reyes breathing the letter, the board meeting, the call from her mother, the commissary eggs, and she felt the strangeness of it, the dense, compressed strangeness of a life that had moved further in 18 hours than it had moved in the previous 6 years. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer it the way a colleague answers, not the way a recruiter answers. Ask. Is this program going to survive, she said, not the first deployment, long term, because programs like this, the ones that threaten the conventional way of doing things, they get funded in a crisis and defunded when the crisis passes. They get political support when they're new and useful and lose it when they become inconvenient. I've watched that happen in medicine. I've watched it happen in the Army, and I need to know if REACH protocol is real or if it's a moment. James held her gaze for a long time, long enough that she knew he was taking the question seriously, which was the only thing she had asked him to do. Honest answer, he said, please. It could go either way. The political will exists right now. What happened yesterday, Reyes, the public response to your story, it's created a window. But windows close. The program will need results. Real, documented, incontrovertible results in the field in situations where the alternative outcome is clearly death. It will need those results in the first year, and it will need them documented in a way that makes the program impossible to quietly defund without a public fight. He paused. Which is why the physician leading it needs to be not just medically excellent, but strategically aware. Not just a doctor, but someone who understands that every successful intervention is also evidence. Every life saved is also an argument. She looked at him. You want me to be the doctor and the advocate simultaneously. I want you to do exactly what you did yesterday on a larger stage with better tools. Save lives and make it impossible for the system to pretend those lives didn't matter. She was quiet for a moment, then, I've been doing that my whole career. I know, he said. You just haven't had a program designed to amplify it. She stood up. She picked up the folder. She picked up her coffee cup and walked it to the disposal station, and she stood there for a moment with her back to the room, looking at nothing in particular, letting the full weight of what came next settle into her body, the way weight needed to settle, not on top of her, but through her integrated, carried without crushing. Monday morning came with fog. She drove herself to Naval Medical Center San Diego at 7:40 a.m., parked, walked to the main entrance, and was met by Chief Petty Officer Sandra Okafor, who was exactly what James had described: compact, precise, and so comprehensively competent that the air around her organized itself differently. "Dr. Grant," Okafor said, and her handshake was the kind that communicated something specific. "I have assessed you, and my preliminary assessment is that you will do. Welcome to Reach Protocol. We have a full day." "Good," Amelia said. "I work better with a full day." Okafor's expression shifted slightly, not a smile, closer to the acknowledgement of a shared operating principle. "Then we're going to get along fine," she said. "This way." The next 2 days were dense. Classified briefings that she could not take notes on and committed to memory, instead the way she had memorized anatomy in medical school, completely without shortcuts, because shortcuts had consequences. Equipment familiarization in the aircraft hangar, where she spent 4 hours going through every item in the modified medical bay with Dominguez, who was quiet and methodical and had hands that moved over equipment the way people's hands moved when they had earned their confidence. Park, the corpsman, not the chairman, was louder, quicker, with a humor that surfaced at odd moments and served the obvious function of pressure release in a team that was going to spend a lot of time in high-stakes environments. On Tuesday evening, she sat in the briefing room with the full team for the first time herself, Dominguez, Park, and Okafor, and she said the things she had decided she needed to say before they went anywhere together. "I want to tell you something about how I work," she said, "and I need you to tell me if it's going to be a problem." She looked at each of them. "I make decisions fast. When I assess a situation clinically, I commit to a course of action and I execute. I don't second guess in motion, I adjust, but I don't reverse without a reason that outweighs the cost of reversal. In the field, hesitation is a clinical decision, and it's usually the wrong one." Nobody said anything, she continued. "I will always explain my reasoning before or after, depending on what time allows. I will always hear information that changes the picture. I will never dismiss something one of you tells me because of rank or because I've already made up my mind. If you see something, I don't see you say it loudly, and I will hear it." She paused. "What I will not do is wait for authorization that takes longer than the window allows. That's not a preference. That's a clinical principle. And if anyone above us in the chain of command, in the operational structure, anywhere believes that principle is negotiable, this is the moment to say so." Silence. Then Okafor said, "It's not negotiable. It's in the charter. Page 7, paragraph 3. You've read the charter." "I've had it memorized since January," Okafor said. "I've been waiting for the physician who would actually use it." Dominguez said, "Same." Park said, "I Googled you. The hallway thing, the needle. I watched the footage from the hospital's security camera that someone leaked. You had the needle out before anyone in that hallway understood what was happening." He paused. "I want to be on the team that works with that." She looked at them. She felt something she didn't have a precise clinical term for: a recognition, a resonance, the tuning fork frequency of people whose operating principles were aligned. "Okay," she said, "then we're ready." Thursday came. 11 days after it was supposed to be impossible, Reach Protocol was operational. The deployment was classified, and it remained classified, and Amelia could not discuss its specifics in the interview she gave to Carolyn Marsh the following Tuesday, which aired 6 weeks later as a 40-minute audio documentary that became, in the weeks after its release, the most listened to public health journalism piece of the year. What she could say and did say was that the program worked. That in its first operational deployment in conditions that she described only as remote and high-risk, Reach Protocol had intervened in a situation where the patient's survival window was measured in minutes rather than hours, and the patient was alive. She said it without drama. That was the thing Marsh commented on afterward, the absence of drama in Amelia's voice when she described the most high-stakes moments. Not detachment, something more like gravity. The weight of a person who understands what they are carrying and has decided to carry it steadily. The independent investigation into Memorial Hospital concluded 9 weeks after the board meeting. Its findings were released publicly as the terms of the investigation required. They were, as James had suggested, they would be comprehensive. Owens's pattern of retaliatory terminations went back 8 years and involved 11 physicians. The medical records leverage he had used against the board member was confirmed and referred to the district attorney's office. 3 additional instances of patient harm cases where delays caused by authorization protocols in Owens' system had contributed to adverse outcomes were documented and reported to the state medical board. Richard Owens resigned before the report was made public. His lawyer released a statement. Amelia did not read it. Gerald Park called her the morning the report was released. "Dr. Grant," he said, "I wanted you to hear it from me first. The physician advocate position has been created. The appeals process is active. The independent oversight framework is in place." He paused. "The physician we've hired to lead emergency medicine, she's 31, she trained at Johns Hopkins, she has combat experience from 2 Army deployments. Her name is Dr. Sarah Kwan. She asked me to tell you she's read everything you wrote and everything that was written about you. And she wanted you to know she is going to do the job right." Amelia was on a Navy base when the call came. She was between briefings. She stood in a corridor with her phone and she thought about the hallway at Memorial Hospital, and the needle, and the 90 seconds, and she thought about the woman who would now stand in that hallway without hesitation, without fear, without a Owens waiting at the end of it. "Tell Dr. Kwan," she said, "that the shift is never over." Park was quiet for a moment. "I'll tell her exactly that." She hung up and went back to her briefing. 6 months after the day that had started with a termination letter, pressed against her face, Amelia Grant stood on the deck of a ship in the Pacific, a different ship, a different operation, the details of which would remain classified for years. And she looked at the ocean in the early morning, and she felt nothing like the person who had sat on a bench outside Memorial Hospital with a plastic bag and a folded piece of paper. She felt instead exactly like herself. The self she had been building since Afghanistan, since the Army, since medical school, since the first moment she had understood that the gap between a living person and a dead one was exactly as wide as the willingness to cross it, and not 1 inch wider. James found her on the deck. He stood beside her. They had been doing this more lately, standing in the same space without needing to fill it with words. The particular comfort of people who have been through enough together that silence doesn't need to justify itself. After a while, he said, "How are you?" She thought about it, really thought about it the way she had learned in the last 6 months to think about questions that deserved real answers. "I'm exactly where I should be," she said. He nodded. He looked at the ocean. "So am I," he said. The ship moved beneath them, steady and purposeful, cutting through water that went on further than either of them could see, and somewhere ahead of them there were people who would need what they had, and they were already moving toward them, and the shift was not over, and the shift would not be over, and Amelia Grant had stopped waiting for permission to make that mean something. She never would again.